So Francis, thank you very much. When you go live, you have to do the little formal thing, although I've said hi to you. But thank you very much for being part of the symposium. And I'm really expecting a very interesting perspective from you, philosophy and mediation. So what, of course, please just, you were telling me, please tell me about yourself. You were, I stopped you there. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, Vikram, for having me on this symposium. And I hope that I can contribute something meaningful, of course. In terms of who I am, I have moved through, I guess, some career changes over the years, so that my first encounter with what I think generally is referred to as conciliation, but it is a form almost like mediation. It was actually the trade union movement, and that was before I became a lawyer. And what I understood then that they were trying to do was to find a way to reconcile the differences between labor and employers, and see how they can work out something. So that is something that was usually guided by legislation, and also obviously had a political input, because of course it was in the interests, economic interests and political interests of persons in office to have settlements of disputes, for example, in the sugar industry and the tourist industry and so on, which are the main industries in Barbados. So Barbados is where I was born and where I grew up, and where I first became a lawyer and started to practice in 1986. But eventually I moved from Barbados and I went through various islands of the Eastern Caribbean. So I'm very familiar with a number of the islands of the Eastern Caribbean where I've resided. And while in the Virgin Islands, which is a British dependent territory, I actually decided to start studying conflict resolution. And of course, one of the main modules in conflict resolution was mediation. And that is my first formal encounter with mediation training, and all of the different forms, etc. involved. That also taught me that, of course, in many cultures, there's a background of mediation that pre-existed the formalized situation that we are being taught now in many universities and by many institutions. So that I'm quite aware of that. But the interesting thing about that experience is that it really was instigated by my further experience as a prosecutor, where I actually prosecuted persons accused of criminal activity. And one of the things I recognized was that a lot of it, what was being prosecuted, including what I prosecuted, came out of very minor skirmishes, if you want to call it that, between individuals, especially with very young people who really hadn't learned the skills at that time. This is where I was. These people hadn't learned the skills of conversing, having a disagreement, learning how to disagree and walk away. They just hadn't learned those skills. So if somebody said something that they didn't like, they had to do something about it. And sometimes that something would have been take a violent action. So, it could involve hitting somebody with a stone or stabbing someone or whatever. And that kind of violence then would end up in the court system. So I felt that I didn't want to continue to be just a person who thought that the only solution to that kind of petty encounter and criminal activity would be to incarcerate somebody, punish them at that level, that people could actually be assisted in learning how to work out their differences. And that led me to conflict resolution, a master's degree in conflict resolution and of course, learning the skills of mediation. As I went along, I, of course, got some exposure from other sources. And this is where I felt that when I went to St. Lucia, I became involved in a different kind of legal activity where I got closer to the culture of the place and recognized that a lot of the conflict arose in the rural areas where people had differences over the use of the land. And sometimes it would involve family members being getting into fights or arguing or going to court over land use. Somebody builds a house that looks better than someone else's house, and there's jealousy, and then there's arguments about who owned the land where you built that house. That was not your land, that was my father's land, so I should have inherited it, not you, etc., etc. But it also it had an impact on the agricultural sector, where individuals would be, there would be, disputes about land use in a different sense. So that if I'm growing, vegetables, and you have cattle, then your cattle is roaming into my vegetables and eating the plants. That's a problem, and that causes some kind of violent outbursts as well. So I recognize the need then for community mediation to be used, and I looked deeper, and I found out that there was something being offered, a fellowship, which was from the Weinstein Jams Foundation at the time, and I applied, and I got the fellowship. So that exposed me to another type of training and a different type of mediation again, where I was invited to go to the United States. I spent a month in New York. I didn't do a very extensive fellowship because, of course, all of this was happening while I was working, and I really couldn't have taken time off at the time to do a year, at a university or something like that. I mean, I had already accumulated 3 university degrees. I didn't think I needed any more. So I decided to just do a short stint in New York, where I shadowed mediation, and it mainly was high-end mediation, where people are mediating matters relating to millions of dollars, including something like the loss of a painting, issues relating to shareholder skirmishes, that sort of thing. And I realized then that the culture of mediation could be very different depending on the location and the issues. So the culture of the mediation clearly in that particular setting was, I would say, use the word limited, not in meaning it as a criticism necessarily, but limited because the question of money, time, etc., how is my investment being affected? Those are at the forefront of the mediation. There's less talk about the relationship and how you build relationships. So that is one of the things I realized coming out of that. And I do recall attending a conference in Madrid, Spain, where when I spoke about my own experience and that it had a lot to do with the court mediations system, and I was mainly an administrator because having become a judge, it was difficult for me to actually conduct mediation myself, this is the experience I had in trying to guide the mediation system, listen to feedback, learn how to try to respond to that feedback. The criticism was that court mediation is not real mediation. So I've encountered that. I have heard that, and of course, what I want to say overall is that I think the most important thing that mediation brings to the table is the way in which it deals with relationships. So that mediation is really all about relationships, and where it can actually improve a relationship, mediation can at least try to stabilize a situation so that people can understand, what's at stake. If it is in a family situation, especially if they're children, people can understand that the children's interests are also part of whatever is going on. Of course, if the relationship between mother and father is better, then it's better for the children, etc., etc. Not to say that you're telling them that they must remain married or that they must remain in a, committed relationship, but you're telling them that the more stable the relationship is, the better for the offspring, better for children. And so I learned along the way that the relationships are very, very important. And as you look at each situation from the point of view of mediation, you would recognize that different personalities will respond differently in every mediation session. So that's one of the things that makes mediation so dynamic, because mediation is not just a hardball case of this approach fits all. You have different kinds of personalities that you have to respond to, and the ability to listen and hear when that mindset, personality, or whatever is articulating what that personality wants to articulate, the ability to then respond by way of asking the right questions, telling them what you have heard, and seeing if you've interpreted what they're saying correctly, et cetera, becomes extremely important. Because if you misunderstand and respond the wrong way, then that could be very damaging to the entire mediation. So, putting it all in a nutshell, I have seen the benefit of mediation at the level of, as I said, starting out in a trade union setting, in a court setting, in a community setting. And I venture to say that mediation would be just as useful in a wider community setting. For example, recently I wrote an article about the conflict resolution, but of course, being influenced mainly by the skills of mediation, conflict resolution, and disasters. What happens in a disaster. And what do I mean by disaster? Well, I live in a hurricane belt. The islands of the Caribbean are in the hurricane belt. And this year we've been kind of spared. In fact, well, it's not really over yet. So let me not talk too fast because they can come even as late as the end of November. But historically, the hurricanes will end around October, and the most dangerous ones will be between September and October. And we have had some very, very dangerous ones in recent times, which devastated Dominica, one of the islands north of Barbados, and the same Virgin Islands, which I spoke about earlier. Really, really bad damage. Almost everything knocked out, almost every single structure damaged, et cetera, et cetera. You have people without homes, nowhere to eat and sleep, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what I mean by disaster. And of course, in those circumstances, you have a number of entities involved in trying to deal with the needs of the people. And those needs, are obviously going to involve relief, food, basic food, water, shelter, et cetera, healthcare. And sometimes they just don't come fast enough. And then sometimes people from one community might feel, well, you're favoring another community, et cetera, et cetera. So immediately what my response to that is, we need to have within that circumstance, people who are good at dealing with conflict. Of course, getting into the system early so that those kind of mistakes are not made, and seeing how you can impress upon those persons who have the ultimate the most power in the situation to do things in a way that everyone feels, well, there's some kind of balance in how matters are being dealt with. We are in a world now with dealing with climate change, and climate change is an existential issue. And I feel that mediation is relevant, because how do you deal with something like that unless people get together and talk, unless people get together and formulate ways out of the problem? And therefore, mediation becomes not just something to be dealt with at the very small, level of interpersonal relationships in the home or interpersonal relationships in the village, but it becomes a global village issue. It becomes a tool, the global village tool that everyone needs to be involved. We need to facilitate the discussion between those parties, the doubters, and those who know and accept that there is an existential problem. And we need to try to see how we can help the conversation to go towards trying to resolve the problem with real solutions. So overall, I think that if you're going to look for a philosophy of mediation, it's all about relationships. It's all about how people articulate their mindsets and act on their philosophy, their own philosophies. All about how you can intervene to help people to listen and to understand each other and see if they can find common ground or common interests. I benefited a lot from some of the literature that is around, starting with things like Getting to Yes and so on, but moving way beyond that, we can appreciate how broad and impactful mediation can be if conflict is understood, if the importance of relationships is put at the front rather than somewhere in the back, and if people recognize that individuals are different, people will have their own opinion about certain things, it doesn't mean they can't work with each other. They have to look for what they have in common. They have to look for the common interests and see how they can work with each other. So in a nutshell, that's what I've tried to do, mainly from the administrative side, as I said, but also practical side, and also guiding people to go to mediation when they want to litigate and think that litigation will resolve everything. I'm saying, are you sure about that? Why don't you try mediation? Because it seems to me that there are some undercurrents here that need to be resolved that litigation may not help you to resolve.
So important thing is that basically that passion is there, because I've been waiting that I can get a little break and I can get Michelle in, but I haven't been able to get that break because of the passion that I can see. And everything that you said, I'm going to take you through, of course, the work that I'm doing connected with what you're saying. But let's get Michelle in first. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Hi, Michelle.
Nice to meet you, Justice Francis. And how are you, Vikram?
Very good. How have you been?
Oh, good. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, Michelle was part of the other symposium that I had on colonization and decolonization. So of course, that was an interesting session. That's what I was wanting to take you through, because everything that you were saying, I mean, connecting it to the work that I'm doing, because of course you first spoke about culture. So there was a symposium last year on mediation in our culture and traditions, which was like 97 speakers, 45 countries. So then we moved to indigenous peoples and mediation. We had that symposium that was in August. So of course, I mean, that's something which we have to connect to. I'll take you through that also. Then colonization and decolonization, definitely how it has affected mediation. And today I keep saying there is colonization of mediation happening, which of course, I mean, that's another detailed thing, which you'll hear me say that if you watch any of my shows, I keep talking about those things. But important thing is that when you said that you, of course, saw what, and as a Weinstein Jams fellow, what you saw in relation to mediation there. Yesterday, Danny Weinstein was in the symposium, and we were
Okay.
talking about, I mean, I was talking about the whole philosophical aspect of it. And he said, look, if we start looking at it from that perspective, jams will become empty. We will not have the mediators, and the way mediation is conducted is on a different level. He understands that. That's what I like about him. He understands that aspect. And the fact is that that can maybe exist, but the other aspect of mediation, the way I'm trying to promote it, which I think you are connecting to, because what I will do is I will take you through what I put out as a World Mediation Circle, and the way mediation, the way I want to promote it. And you spoke about climate change. So under that mediation circles, there are going to be various circles. So one of them is climate change mediation circle. I'll take you a little bit on that. But before that, Michelle, you have to tell us about yourself, because obviously that symposium happened, but you have to tell us about yourself, and then we'll move into philosophy and mediation. Although Francis has told us about philosophy and his philosophy about mediation and everything. That's been interesting, but we'll go more detailed into it. But Michelle, please.
Okay, well, I'm Michelle, and I have a company named Change Starts with Hope, where I do mediations. I practice cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness therapy. I do so much, to be quite frank. And my company was Change Starts with Hope, but then I've done a tagline with that, and it ends with belief. And the difference between, well, hope and belief, I look at the difference between the two, and I say that's between a dream and faith. And I think that I always tie that in with mediation, because, you know, we expect and we want so much change to occur, you know, during our mediation and during any type of conflict resolution scenario or situation. But if we don't believe that it can happen, then I think that that's where we go through an impasse, or we develop stagnation in the development of conflict resolution. I thought about what my philosophical perspectives on mediation may be, and I listened to a couple of your symposiums last night. Well, it was last night for me. I guess that's in the morning for you. But I think that my philosophical perspective, they come from my life and my education. And I think that my career, my career and education, they both groomed me and cultivated me into the person that I am right now. And I looked up a saying, it was a quote, and it is one thing to show a man that he is in error, and another to put him in possession of the truth. I believe John Locke wrote that. And I thought that that was so powerful, because it defines exactly how I am when I am approaching a mediation. I don't look at people for their behaviors. I look past the behaviors and I look towards a solution. I understand that that when I'm mediating, I try to not I do not consider past behavior, because it's not indicative of current behavior. I think that when I'm mediating, my philosophy is to solve the problem, to prevent the situation from happening again. So that's a little me. I guess I touched on philosophy just a tad, but I have more to add to that.
Yeah. No, I think why the background is important is because where is this person coming from, and that philosophy and of course we are just still limited to talking about in terms of experience. But what I keep talking about, I don't know, Francis, if you've seen any of you, I don't know whether you've seen any of the shows that I do, but one is called Evolution of a Mediator. And the idea behind that was that how a person is brought up, the value system that they're brought up in, the value systems that their parents, their grandparents have, all that and all the experiences that you go through makes you the mediator that you are. And that is where you come from. And then beyond that, the mediation is another, maybe just a pathway. But I don't want to give any direction to what today we are discussing. Maybe we'll talk about it later. But let me just put up for a minute about the symposium, because what happens is I have this abrupt way of starting things and we don't even know what we're talking about. People don't know. And they say, what is happening here? So basically, this is a symposium, philosophy and mediation. We've got people from quite a lot of places, but of course it can always grow. And hopefully next time it'll grow more. So that is about this. And then about the the World Mediation Circle. Check a bit on my, it's actually on my website. So mediatorvikram.com, you'll find this. But World Mediation Circle is what I call it. And the idea being, I want you to read this part. Basically from here to here, this is the kind of philosophy behind it. So mediation circles will help. This is, I mean, a World Mediation Circle, and then you have circles within the circle. So you have every community, every school, every organization having a mediation circle, and then we'll have issue-based, like the climate change mediation circle. Then we'll have, I mean, lots of country-wise and everything. So this is the idea: help people resolving their disputes in an amicable and collaborative manner, and attempt to heal and strengthen relationship, which is what you also mentioned. Then I'm creating mediation circles to bring a moral values, principles, and ethics-based humanistic approach to dispute resolution, where heart, soul, spirituality play an important role in relation to the mediator, peacemaker, and participant. I mean, the World Mediators Conference that I had, there was a nice thing that someone brought out, that why do we call them parties? This comes from the court system. This being a process where they should connect it in a different aspect. The participants is what I use there. And I think that's been a good thing to move away from that language. So heart, soul, spirituality, I didn't tell you about that. There was a symposium in April on heart, soul, spirituality, and mediation. And why I'm telling you this, Francis, I don't know, Michelle, I'm sure, I don't know whether she also knows, but all these various events that I do, important thing is to look at mediation from a different perspective. And heart, soul, spirituality sometimes maybe just doesn't even come up. And when you see maybe the experience that you had as a fellow, how you looked at mediation, there's a different concept, and they're all right in their own world. I'm not even saying that should not exist and all. People want that, and every part of the world people want a different thing. But important thing is, Francis, there is a show called Mediator Experiences, where I've had conversations with JAMS fellows. It started as that only, that let's have conversations with JAMS fellows, because someone on one of my shows, in Conversations with a Beautiful Mind, there was Migle, she's in Lithuania, so she was a fellow of that year. And I got to know about the fellowship there. So I said, let's talk to these people, because I saw the list and I said, I know so many of these people. So why not let's have conversations with them about their experience in relation to the fellowship. So that's why it's called Mediator Experiences. Over time, we'll talk about people within their experiences in the mediation world. So I've had one person who's not a fellow up till now. I mean, she's in France working at the Ukraine-Poland border, but I found the work that she's doing very interesting. So I said, let's move away from the fellows for the moment. Let's talk to other people. So you have to be on that show also. You have to record your experience as a JAMS fellow. So this is broadly what, I mean, I wanted to put across. Maybe I'll just show you. Sometimes a visual is a better thing than what I say. So I'll just put down the visual of that mediation circle, that climate change. Just a visual sometimes says, okay, there is something happening here. So it's called the climate change mediation circle. There's going to be a global climate change mediation circle. Then we'll have Barbados one. Michelle will have one in the US, everywhere. So we'll have these mediation circles, and we'll get people, like-minded people together. And it's not going to be something that we have to grow. The whole world has to come under one umbrella at the same time. We'll grow like-minded people, connecting like-minded people, and we'll grow as we go. I think that's a little too much that I've said about what I'm doing, but I normally don't do that. So Francis, I don't know, Michelle has seen some of the things that she's saying, the earlier, whatever sessions we've had, but now we're moving towards, of course, philosophy. You've spoken a lot about it, but in terms of the mediator, was interesting thing that came up from our discussion was a mediator being a philosopher, and mediation being philosophy. Something connections were made, and I thought that was an interesting direction in it. So please take it forward.
Well, I've seen mediation also from the position of leadership. So from that point of view, one has to be a philosopher, because if you're going to lead effectively, you have to have something driving you to bring about that leadership. So I have found, as I said, I've been involved in the administration of mediation, and therefore I've had to try to help with the training. I've had to generally deal with issues that may arise in relation to how the mediation is organized, and so on and so forth. Whether people are attending sessions, etc. The whole thing is to try to stay above the small issues and keep the big picture in mind. so that at all times it is important to keep the mediation system going. At all times, it is important to continue to encourage mediators to if they can improve their skills, listen or shadow other mediations, and etc., so that they can see how different circumstances are dealt with. Because I think what I'm acutely aware of is that in today's world, it is very difficult to solve any problem from looking at it from one particular point of view. One has to be aware of various points of view. You don't have to inject your personal point of view. What you do is you listen to the various points of view and you are trying to help them to make sense of it by understanding each other's point of view and what they may very well have in common, how they can move on together in spite of the differences. So I think one of the things that comes out for me in present circumstances is that it is very, very difficult to assume that everybody's on the same page from the point of view of either belief or, you know, even philosophy interests. Can you, however, still, by listening to them, whatever the issues are, help them to find a common interest, help them to find a way forward where they can work, they can still work together. I actually found that some people, even in the court system, they may be doing this without knowing that they're doing it. So that when you were doing what we call case management, which did not exist prior to, in this region, prior to 2000, in the form that it exists now. But when you're doing that, sometimes that's the first time that the persons who are involved in the conflict, which is going before the court, find themselves in the same room, speaking to each other face to face. And what can happen at that point, even if it is not a mediator, simply by encouraging them to do certain things together, so that you want to determine what the issues are, you want to determine what the law is, you want to determine, you know, certain things, work together to see if you can resolve those things. You might be surprised to see what can happen going down the road. I know it's not the ideal scenario, because of course, back of their mind still is, I'm going to win this case. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to beat you. But I think that sometimes unwittingly that can come up. I was at a conference recently of lawyers which are dealing with mediation. And again, the whole issue of what are we really supposed to be doing in a court system, articulated even by someone as entrenched in the court system as the UK Master of the Rolls, who is supposed to be the person in charge of the Court of Appeal. He's saying more and more what they want to encourage is that people understand that they are in the business of resolving conflict. They are in the business of resolving issues. They're not just in the business of going through litigation for the sake of it. So from the point of view of litigation, that's where how I see things. Outside of that, I think the whole question of being able to understand differences and understand that even in relationships, even in intimate relationships, there are differences. Nobody becomes the other's clone. And therefore, you have to learn how to deal with differences. Maybe that's why some religions say that marriage is a sacred sacrament, because at the end of the day, it's two people trying to see how they can resolve their differences. And there's supposed to be more to it than that, of course, but a lot of it is trying to resolve differences. And so when I look at almost everything that I encounter now in terms of organizational work, legal work, family issues, and relationships, generally friendships, it is constantly and repeatedly a balancing act, listening, telling people what you feel, but at the same time, discussing with them how they feel, and maybe seeing how you can find a common interest along the way that keeps a relationship going. So at the core of everything is that ability to, and that drive and interest in maintaining relationships that are beneficial, of course, not ones that are destructive, but relationships that are beneficial and that make a difference. And also, of course, in that manner, providing some leadership, because one of the things I remember first about the course I did was that one of the first things we looked at was the concept of how to make meetings work. And I believe anyone listening here who has been to meetings will know that sometimes some meetings are a waste of time. You go, people talk, they don't agree on anything. You go in and you come out more confused than when you went in. So the whole idea of how to make meetings work is one of the training modules going towards mediation. So, and I'm going towards being a conflict resolution expert, because if you can go into a room with 30 people and somebody wants to talk about something that happened to them yesterday that is totally not relevant to the issue on the agenda, et cetera, the point is that was a part of the training, and I understood, and I understand even better now why that's part of the training, because you want to know how you can actually get people, large group or small group, to talk to each other in a constructive manner so that something constructive can come out of what they spoke about. And then you go further into the training of what you call facilitation, where you go in knowing that there is a problem and that there's a problem to resolve, but you're not necessarily hired as a mediator, but you're brought on to assist these people to see, identify. Sometimes all it is to identify the problem, sometimes it's to identify the problem and then see if you can resolve it. And those are, again, a set of very specific skills. And as you grow on that, then you get to the point of formal mediation skills. And that's where you then start to learn all of these other techniques about listening and reframing and the use of a caucus, et cetera, et cetera. So I see it as a leadership. I see it in the community I come from. I see it as something that puts you in a position of leadership.
No, interestingly, I tell you, when you're talking about leadership, the idea, the long-term concept, the idea behind the mediation circles is, and there was a session that I had in my conference, World Mediators Conference, is mediators as leaders. That's where the future lies, because that is one thing that was missing. Getting people to sit together and have a conversation is what not happening. Politics, activism, advocacy, lots of groups made, but sitting and getting people together, that's where the mediator comes in, and that's where the mediator mindset. So the whole structured approach and the whole concept, people pushing on training and all, I'm saying that this is part of some people, it just comes naturally to them, and that's where philosophy comes in. Like Michelle is going to tell us about her philosophy of life, and that will then connect to the fact that this is something which comes from within, and just identifying those people with that mediator mindset. So of course, people sitting together, that conversation of course is important, and that's the larger role of mediators in society. So Michelle, you have to tell us about your philosophy of life.
Well, for me, I think that mediation, it fit into my life so perfectly at the proper time, because growing up, I was I guess many would label me as ornery. And I'm not big on labels, because while I may have been labeled an ornery person, that's not who I am, and that's not technically, who I was. I think that through my education and my growth, I was able to become, this peacemaker type of person, which it just seems so odd when I think about myself now to back then. It just seems so odd to me. And I think that's the main reason why labels are so, we have to get away from labeling people's as behaviors and what we think they are, because that can determine sometimes their future. And if I had listened and really stuck with what people labeled me as, I wouldn't be what I am today. And I think that being a mediator, I remember in school, I'm just going to go back for a second, and where a mediator was needed, that a mediator mentality was needed. My counselor told me that I would amount to nothing. You know, he told me that I should drop out and just get my GED. And this was in my senior year of high school. Had I listened to this person, I would not be where I am today. So it would have been nice to see like high school counselors or just educators, people in academics to have that mediator, you know, type of mindset where they have to look beyond their personal views and their personal experiences and get past the labels and look towards solving an issue, understanding the why a situation within a person is occurring, and then lean towards change. And I think that change starts with hope. I think that fits in perfectly, because even though one can hope for something, it doesn't end there. You have to sincerely believe that it can occur, and that's what mediation is to me. And it's a quote, and I hope this quote. I love this quote because it means it embodies what I am, but I don't think that I'm saying the person's name correctly. So it's Talmud or Talmud, but it's spelled Talmud. So pardon me for if I seem disrespectful and not being able to pronounce the name correctly, but it's we don't see things the way they are, we see them the way we are. So when I walk into any type of situation where I have to handle a conflict, any type of mediation, I always think about that. I say to myself how I'm looking at this, you know, towards the other people. And I also think about how they're looking at it, you know, to each other. And it's not about, you know, I'm right or I'm wrong. It's the way we see things. And it just happens to be that's the way we are. And I don't base any expectations only on what I see, because I think that I will blind myself to a reality of change. You know, you could walk into a mediation, you could say to yourself, wow, this is just, you know, it's just not working. It's not going my way, you know, and that's a lot of times when we get to that impasse and we think that it's we don't see it, the conflict able to be resolved. And I think that when that instinct comes into one's mind, and that could be through the mediator, or it could be with the people participating in the mediation. I think that we have to look at that instinct and say, you're a lie, and hope for things to change and, you know, just work towards peace. I think the mind is a powerful thing, and it can either bring forth change, or it could bring forth lots of destruction. And so when people have that philosophy of a mediator where peace is always the goal, and we look towards having different alternatives to solve disputes, I think that it would be so much better for so many different people. And again, I have to stress this because of my life experiences. When you come from a life that is filled with so much pain and so much turmoil, you will understand that a conflict is not what you are. It's something that you've experienced. It's something that you've seen. It could be on a daily basis, you know, and it's just, but it doesn't make you who you are. And as a mediator, I think my philosophy is just to seek peace without labels, and just be able to be open, because I try to work towards understanding different emotions. And I also realized that that once someone is triggered, I know that neutrality can become compromised. So I try to also not focus on or not let triggers enter into me, because I don't want my neutrality to be compromised, and I do not want a trigger from something in my past, because I mean, you can't take away the fact that I am human, and we all are human as mediators, and we all have backgrounds. So I think that it's very important for us to keep in our mind the philosophy of neutrality and trying to remain untriggered, because I think once it happens, it's very hard, but I also realize that behavior does not equal emotion. I'm so sorry, I'm like rambling off all of my.
Perfectly all right. No,
I
what
have
you're
so
saying is
many.
that you are going to put everything that you have in your mind out there, because it's important. And with this aspect that you're saying about, I mean, whatever people label and everything, that's a world that has been created. What I'm trying to do is create another world on the other side. People keep saying, oh, you live in a bubble. I said, that's my bubble. That's my world. And that is also a world. It doesn't matter. But the idea being that let's create that this circle concept is that let's get that world together. That's also a world. We can live in that world. I mean, we don't have to say that everyone we are going to be. I mean, at least I'm not a spiritual guru that we have to change the world and their thought process and I mean, to work on that direction. No, get people together who have that mindset, and that's important. I think getting those people together, and I think change will happen, and people will look at things differently when they see a group of people working in a positive way, and that negative aspect is not there. But neutrality aspect, Michelle, definitely has to be debated. Whether are you supposed to be neutral or not? And that's when what Desmond Tutu said comes into. We have to debate this. We're going to have a discussion on this. 12th of December is International Day of Neutrality. We're going to have a discussion on neutrality and mediation. So in this kind of situation, if you are a neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So neutrality, I think, is just a nice theoretical concept that someone put out there. I don't think that really in the real world, I don't think we really should be getting so much into it, but we'll have a discussion on that. Of course, Francis wants to give a little thought on the neutrality aspect. Please do that. Although it's a different discussion by itself. That's a whole session by itself.
That was good.
Yes.
Actually, I wanted to speak on peace because, of course, in the context that I'm coming from, that notion of peace is very important. At the same time, you have to go back to, I can't remember the particular writer, but there is a notion of something called negative peace. And a negative peace is what almost all of our populations that have been under colonialism have found ourselves in for hundreds of years. And a negative peace was slavery. So because you didn't have an alternative but to be peaceful, because the alternative to being peaceful was to be shot. So we have to understand that peace has its particular context, and this is why we never say that conflict per se is bad, because conflict exposes problems. Mm-hmm. Conflict often exposes injustices. Now, of course, as long as you use the word justice, you get into some difficulty because one man's justice is another man's euphoria or whatever. But so I just wanted to make that comment because, of course, it's important to seek peace. But at the same time, it's very important while you're seeking the peace to make sure that it's a positive peace, so that you're building, you're empowering while you're making peace. You're also empowering people, and you're not restraining them in a way that is negative. But what I heard coming from Michelle in any event, when she spoke about labels, was that one of the ways in which people restrain others and imprison them is by labeling them. So of course, you clearly have an idea of not wanting to make people accept labels, and therefore and live under a label. You're trying to see how people can, that underlying person, that person who is capable of human things, can work with other people who are capable of being human. And that is the important issue there. So I just wanted to say that from my philosophy of it, I like to be always very careful with peace. You know, we get a lot in the country where I am in Barbados, people talking about the good old days and so on and so forth. And I always shake my head and say, you know, there was a whole lot of incest and there was a whole lot of stuff going on in those good old days, and they were hush hush, right? And now that we have a more open society, people are talking about these things, people are letting that anger that arose as a result, they're letting it out. And that has repercussions for all sorts of things out there that people just don't know how to deal with. But the so-called good old days were really not that good. You know, it was just that people didn't know their options. People settled for what they had, and a lot of that has changed. You know, the position of women, for example, has changed dramatically over the years. We now have more women than men in our community in almost every single profession. I mean, we're talking doctors, lawyers, almost every single profession, you have more women than men. That was not so 60 years ago. You know, it would have been the total reverse. So we have situations where we have to recognize that the peace that we're trying to build now has to be different to the peace that existed in the past, because its content has to be different. The societies have changed. People are more aware of what their needs are and what they're willing to live with and what they're not willing to live with. And I think it's very important to understand that. So as a mediator, going into any mediation, I think that I would be very well aware of that. I do agree with the point about triggers, because, you know, I have felt that myself, even as a judge, that something that somebody says could possibly trigger something. And I really need to sort of sit back and, you know, let it calm down and so on before I move on. So there's a lot in common. I just think that, you know, it's important to be very careful about some concepts, depending on the society that you're in.
So important thing, let me point out at this point, you did talk about conflict, and like, I mean, that's a whole debate whether certain conflicts should be resolved, can be resolved. So that whole debate happens. For me, what I focused on is dispute resolution. So I call mine the dispute resolution revolution. Maybe a smaller aspect of it, I feel that let's just resolve disputes first. The conflict part of it, we have lots of people, and a lot of people are required in that, not just mediators, a lot of other people are required in the conflict resolution space. So for me, it's dispute resolution revolution. And I'm a little focused maybe, but I just feel that if people experience mediation in relation to dispute resolution, they'll take it forward in other aspects of their life, and maybe they can resolve their conflicts without the requirement of a third person. So that's another thing. Those will be maybe effects of the whole process. But Michelle is now happy about the neutrality part of it. I think she was a little stuck on this aspect that whether I have to be neutral or not. Now she can quote Desmond Tutu and say.
Well, I do have. I think that because you are very, from what I'm gathering, you are very strong with words, and you, a lot of things, it seems like same thing when I'm saying, you know, eliminate labels. It seems like certain words you want to eliminate because of the damage that it can cause. And when you put up the quote in regards to neutrality, I could understand that, but then I sat here and I thought about it, and I said to myself, in mediation, if I do not remain neutral in my mind, then it's going to make me sway too much. It's going to trigger my experiences, and it's going to take me mentally to a place where I don't think that I should be. But if I tell my mind to remain neutral, then I am able to control the narrative of how I'm able to be at peace with letting both stories be told. Because ultimately, when you're into any type of mediation scenario or a conflict resolution, I think that both parties, rightfully so, they have their opinions that they believe that are correct. And our goal is to just make peace. I'm not a judge. I'm not the person that's going to say, no, you're wrong and no, you're correct. I think that I am just there to make peace with what both people, you know, whoever is involved in the conflict resolution. I'm just there to help guide. I want to be that peacemaker. So if I'm neutral, not per the definition that or quote that you put up, if I'm neutral in my mind as far as not guiding my opinions one way, you know, swaying one way more than the other, I think that that's how I am. I'm not neutral where I say, okay, it's just, I'm not going to speak up, because during mediations, if something is not right, I have spoke up, and I have been trained to speak up. And just, that's just me regardless. I am a very vocal person, but I understand fully. And I did agree, I agreed with the quote, but when necessary, I think that in my mind, I have to call myself a neutral. I have to, just to keep myself at peace.
Well, this is Dubisha. This is going to be a debate we're going to have as part of that
Yeah.
symposium, because there's a book that Bernie has written. I have a show called Talking Books. So we spoke about this book, The Neutrality Trap, Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change. So have a look at this episode. I mean, it's all
Okay.
you can search there. So he's spoken about the book, but then we can have that discussion when we have that symposium on neutrality and mediation. But there's a whole area by itself that needs to be discussed, because when you talk about the larger role of mediators in society, which is what the whole idea is, that mediation is just one aspect of what you do. You will create a space, a safe space for people. Is what, of course, people tell me that you've created a safe space here. Similarly, everyone has to create that safe space around them, and then that whole dialogue and conversation that has not happened, because I just feel that, look, mediators, their mindset is something that they can take care of what society otherwise has moved away from, which I keep saying that that's politics, and we can't blame them. That's what they do. So that's what they have to divide society. If they don't divide it, how are they going to exist? And this is not today. The colonizer did it. That's what the colonizer had to do, because without dividing them, how do you rule? I mean, we were like, I think 5,000 bureaucrats in India. Let me say ruling over 300 million people. How do you do that? You have to break up society into pieces, and which is the politics everywhere. In the US, this is another example of how you want to use democracy, but 33% of the votes of the country you get, and you're ruling. I'm using the word ruling. Maybe you don't like it, but ruling, and 37% of the people don't even vote. So where is the democracy? Where is a majority in the whole concept? Is a minority, and how you divided the society into pieces where you can arithmetic puts it together. I'm going into a direction which this is not part of this. So I get dragged into these discussions sometimes, but that's not the point. Now, the only interesting thing that I said that came out from the other sessions was mediator as a philosopher, or mediator is a philosopher. So any thoughts on that? Francis, anything on that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, as I tried to articulate earlier, I think that my worldview at present comes out in my approach to dispute resolution, which is that I would say, if I see a situation like the one that Desmond Tutu was referring to, clearly I will call it out. If I'm in the middle of a session where I'm trying to resolve a dispute, and I see somebody is doing something like that, I would tell them, well, based on what I'm hearing, this is what the person on the other side says they're experiencing. they're experiencing serious hardship. There's, as a result of your activity, as a result of what you do, they're experiencing certain serious pain and suffering, and maybe you need to think about it. I wouldn't see that as not being neutral, because I think that it is impossible to resolve the dispute without addressing certain issues. So a deep part of my worldview has to be that there are certain things that you cannot expect human beings to put up with. The people are becoming more and more aware of rights, if you want to call them that. They're becoming more and more aware of what they need to continue to exist, to live a decent and reasonably happy life, and therefore it's going to eventually become difficult for persons to rule over them in ways that do not accommodate those needs. And that is wherever it may arise in this world, that's going to be a problem. So that's how I see it. But I also see it, as I said before, that individuals who want to ignore things like climate change, et cetera, are eventually going to have to come around to the realization that it's an existential issue. And the individuals who they think support them will one day look at them straight and say, well, you are trying to be a leader who leads us basically over the edge of a cliff. So I think all of these things are part of what I think I stand for, represent, and represent my worldview. My philosophy, therefore, is that you have to be looking at the needs of people. You have to be, all of these things have to be reasoned. So there has to be the ability of people to talk these things through. And eventually what is reasonable is what is worked out, what can be worked out, because I do not know if there's any other definition of reasonable. Yeah, I mean, if people need to have the basics, they also need to have a little bit be more beyond the basics, and in order to live a reasonably happy life. And therefore, that is what comes out as being reasonable. So I think that I'm not sure if I would qualify myself as a utilitarian. I would think that it's not that, but it's the ability to work things, talk things through, the ability to look at what you think people are capable of living with, and seeing how you can get in the different disputing parties to, not parties, you said something other language.
Participants. Yes.
Yeah, but different participants in any conversation to work things out in that regard and find a way forward.
No, because participants basically, look, thing is that when you say that let's sit around a round table and do it, they cannot be sides. And once you've said the parties, you've already created a kind of side. So we're all working together to reach a resolution. But the important thing about reasonable is we have to get fair and reasonable people to create that environment. So the Barbados mediation circle we have to create that, and then we get people slowly, step by step, as people come in. Yes, Michelle? Are we going to do another mediation circle in creating one where we can get these fair, reasonable people to come together, have a conversation? Look, I think finally it's about those conversations. It's just about having those conversations and having people come together to just have those conversations moving to a positive direction. Whether the conversations are positive or not, I don't know, but at least they move to a certain positive direction rather than the divisive aspect of what's been happening. So it's a slow process. We do that. But otherwise, Michelle, what do you think? I mean, in relation to mediator being a philosopher, is a mediator a philosopher?
When you said it, I stopped and thought about it. So I'm like, oh my goodness, are mediators philosophers? And yes and no. I'm conflicted with that one. I think I have to do a little bit more research so I can speak from an intellectual perspective. I hate sounding ignorant. And so I think at times maybe it may seem like a mediator is a philosopher, and at times I think that no. So I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and answer that and then come back and say I disagree with what I said. If that makes
No, in the morning we had a very nice session. Mr. Panchu, he's from India, and he gave a very nice aspect of this aspect of about philosophy and philosophers and mediation. But let me put up, I mean, there was Andrea had, there was an interesting session. Of course, she was talking about her philosophy of her father's philosophy. It was his birthday, day before yesterday. Yesterday. So she wanted to bring out the philosophy of life that she got from him. So because he had MS and he was kind of not, let's not say bedridden, but yes, could not do not too much activity that he could do. So he was observing people, and from that observation of people and things, what he brought out and what she picked up from there, and how today she actually understands that, because maybe when you're growing up and you see it, maybe it doesn't click. But that philosophy of life, when she's become a mother, she was looking at that. So she put up an interesting definition of philosophy. Let's put it up there. And from that, whether mediation itself is philosophy at work, and the aspect of a mediator being a philosopher. So let's just see, philosophy is quite unlike any other field. It is unique both in its method and its nature and breadth of its subject matter. So, I mean, I'm just saying, in the morning also I was trying to do this. Whenever we're looking at philosophy, the word, can we look at mediation and put it somewhere there, and let's see how it works out there. So philosophy pursues questions in every dimension of human life, and its techniques apply to problems in any field of study or endeavor. No brief definition expresses the richness and variety of philosophy. It may be described in many ways. It is a reasoned pursuit of fundamental truths, a quest for understanding, a study of principles of conduct, seeks to establish standards of evidence, to provide rational methods of resolving conflicts, and to create techniques for evaluating ideas and arguments. Philosophy develops the capacity to see the world from the perspective of other individuals and other cultures. It enhances one's ability to perceive the relationships among the various fields of study, and it deepens one's sense of the meaning and variety of human experience. If I put mediation there, it fits in. Does it or does it not, Francis? Do you think it fits in somewhere?
It does, of course. And, I think I wanted to add, of course, that the two things. There's some sayings out there that I think about a lot when I do what I do, and whenever I have to talk about mediation and conflict resolution or dispute resolution, and I think about change in that context, and I think about be the change you'd like to see, so that where does the change you like to see in your family, in your society, in your community, and then eventually in the world, what is that change? If you have a concept of what that change is, you have a philosophy. And if you can tell yourself, I want to be that, then that's the guiding light right there. So I would say this, that, people in the Caribbean, for example, some older than I am, persons my age group, we followed the civil rights movement in the United States very, very, very closely and with great interest. We followed Martin Luther King with great interest and admiration. But we also had some admiration for some of the other guys, Malcolm X and so on, who did not always necessarily agree with Martin Luther King. And because of the time, we felt that some of the solutions could not be, Martin Luther King could not find some of the solutions because of the approach was peace. Looking back on it, I don't know if there was any right or wrong. The point is that they both contributed to some kind of to a change, some fundamental change, not totally total change, but fundamental change. And I think that was very important. So we learned from other people's experiences, the experiences of people like Nelson Mandela, you know, who went to prison for 27 years and came out and spoke about making peace with the people who imprisoned him. How do you do that unless you are the change that you would like to see? Yeah. How do you do that? And so Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and of course, Nelson Mandela sort of come together, and Desmond Tutu as well, who was one of the persons who led that effort to have peace and reconciliation process. You know, they have been criticized from some angles that some people needed to be tried and imprisoned and punished, et cetera, and not get away with it by just simply talking and saying they're sorry. But again, it's one of these situations where there's no hard and fast right or wrong answer. There needed to be some situation where you had to get away from the likelihood of a bloodbath or just you know, where we're going to just seek revenge on those people who instituted apartheid and try to move forward without doing that. And that meant that people had to have in their heart the thing that the peace and being what they would like to see. They call it the Rainbow Revolution. That's what you know, South Africa wanted to do. Has it worked? I don't know. But the point is that these are the kind of things that I look at very carefully throughout the world. And I say to myself, you know, there are all sorts of changes. What just happened in Colombia with the kind of change that happened there, that's the first person of a certain kind of progressive thinking that has been in office for how many years? And a woman of African descent being part of the government is again something that was not heard of for many, ever in Colombia. You have to look at these things and ask yourself, maybe somebody there was becoming the change they would like to see. And that then can form the part of a philosophy going forward.
I think, yeah, that's important thing is to first connect with yourself and find out what do you really maybe stand for, or what is your philosophy. I think maybe sometimes what happens is, I think that itself, to reach that point, maybe takes a lifetime for people, because yes, there's so much happening around you, don't even realize who you are or what you want. And once you connect to that, and then of course I'm still keeping the discussion into the mediation part of it and as a mediator, but I think when you connect to that, then in that symposium, Heart, Soul, Spirituality, the aspect of authentic self came out. So that authentic self, first of all, connecting to yourself, and then that authentic self being as part of that mediation, that role, I think, is where, I mean, that's the kind of mediation I would want promoted. I'm not saying that's the only way it's going to happen. There will be other things happening on other ways. I mean, the transactional aspect of it, and just let's just do a deal kind of thing. That'll keep happening. I mean, you know, but we don't have to say that that's the only kind of mediation. There will be the other aspect. So, Michelle, what do you think of that? Connecting to yourself, the authentic self, like Francis said about the, I mean, just the matter of having a philosophy towards these things. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my philosophy is that mediation is about addressing conflicts or disputes that happened in the past in order to develop peace in the future. You know, that's, for me, that's it, you know, in a nutshell. And thinking about everything that Justice Francis just said, I think that he touched on so many important parts of the mindset of a peacemaker. And it's almost as if I want to take away and change the word mediator and, you know, incorporate some type of, it would take away neutrality, I should say, and add in there peacemaker in order to keep that person who's conducting the mediation in that mindset of a goal of keeping the peace. I just love all of his comparisons with the civil rights movement and just thinking about Nelson Mandela and how he was able to walk out and say, display, not even say, he displayed peace. And how many of us are able to do that, even as mediators? You know, how many of us are able to walk through after going through the different things that he, for example, Mandela went through, and remain that person that is not neutral, taking that word out of the scenario, but simply a peacemaker. And I think that mediation, that's what it's about. It's all about being what you want other people to be. And I think that conflict, we can't get away from disputes. It's something that happens. I think the world enjoys to turn off of disputes. So many people make money with disputes, you know, being active in the world. And I think that it has economic value, unfortunately. However, I think that also with more people looking into mediation and looking at themselves as peacemakers and work towards changing the mindsets of individuals, I think mediation would be, peace would be something that is more embraced. I really don't, I don't know how it could really happen.
No, actually, what I mean, after what Francis said and the peace pick and the peace part of it that you're saying, I'm just putting down a sentence there. So because I'm saying that first you have to be at peace within yourself when you connect to that. So if you talk about Nelson Mandela, what are being, so I was just putting out a sentence coming from what kind of what Francis said about be the change. I'm saying be at peace to bring peace in the world, something like that. So I mean, I think that's where it starts. I think being, and that is when you can actually, be it in a mediation or in the world at large, the fact that if you are at peace, I think the people around you will connect to that. And that is where this heart, soul, spirituality, that concept of energy that a mediator brings in, I think that energy comes in because you've reached a certain point within first, and then you can actually create that whatever energy. I mean, these are words we use. We don't even really know what that thing is, but there is more to it than what is put out in theory. There's lots more happening there, and maybe people don't have words for it or what's really happening there. But it is, I mean, there is magic. Some people call it magic, whatever. I mean, words, you can keep playing with words because Michelle thinks I like my words. I like my words, yes. but I don't have enough. I don't have that much of a vocabulary to put in words to all these things. But as a thought process, I think maybe you get an idea what I'm talking about. It is more than what is happening, and that is happening only because of what is happening within the mediator and how it connects to the other people, which again might not be the topic of this symposium right now. That is maybe heart, soul, spirituality, mediation symposium. But I think somewhere I'm connecting to that, and what Francis is bringing in about the change, I think being the change, and how much of that change and what all needs to change, I think we need to have a whole discussion there. So that, Francis, you've actually laid a base for that symposium, heart, soul, spirituality and mediation, which is going to come up again next year. You have to participate in that and bring that. And of course, the one on neutrality, which is coming up on December. Michelle, you are going to bring your thoughts. You will have now studied it. Francis, please participate in that also. In the neutrality, that's the 12th December, we'll start that. I'll put the schedule out. You can give your choice of dates. So I think that's because I feel that that's an area which definitely needs to be discussed. So in that sense, Francis, anything including remarks kind of thing that you want to put across?
Nothing really that I can add to, not much that I can add. I mean, I just think that this was a really good discussion. I enjoyed it a whole lot. I just think that a lot of mediators, unfortunately, are not necessarily exposed to this kind of discussion. So that again is what puts us have this opportunity to be in a position of leadership, because by and large, most of them will be doing is just going from dispute to dispute and trying to see how they can help to resolve it. It may be that deep down inside, they all have something of what we've spoken about and it needs to be developed, or maybe it's okay where it is. And they can use whatever it is they have inside to continue to mediate. So that's all I would think. I would wish all of them well, and you as well, and Michelle, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very nice, of course, everything that you brought. I think it connects with what I've been trying to do, and I think you are going to be participating in a lot of other of these activities. But important thing is the Barbados Mediation Circle, which is what we're going to start off. So Michelle, concluding remarks.
I think that, well, first of all, thank you, Vikram, again, and listening to everyone's perspectives, you know, Justice Francis, he brought up so many different perspectives that were powerful. And then you brought up a lot of different things that I think that are very important in regards to the power of words. And even the Bible discusses how powerful the tongue is. So it's not as if anyone should be ignorant to what we say, how it matters, you know. I think that having conversations like this is very much needed. It's humbling because it doesn't make anyone higher than the other. We all seem to be, you know, all on the same level. You know, I mean, Francis, he's a justice, you know, and I think that he's coming with so much peace, but also with so much experience and so much knowledge. But he took the time to sit here with us and just as a person, you know, with that mediator mind. And I love the fact that we're able to all come together, and it's just humbling for me. So I appreciate conversations like this because it makes me look at things from a different perspective, and it puts me in check, and it helps me think about, okay, Michelle, you need to change this word. You need to think more this way in order to be that peaceful person that you are sincerely working towards being, because I do want to be what people look at and say, okay, that's how I want to walk into situations. She's so peaceful and so calm, you know, with how she walks in and deals with this. And that's what I want people to see. So I thank you both for even for this discussion. I think these type of things are very much needed.
I think that what you just said about Francis, the aspect that him being a judge hasn't brought that into the picture. He's come as himself, and that's what the mediator mindset is all about. You come in as who you are. All these other things around you, of course, I mean they exist, but you as a person, when you come there, the whole conversation is different. It's because you're connecting to the individual, the thoughts that the person has within, and that's what, for me, that's exactly what happens in a mediation, should happen. And that's what a mediator brings in. You're connecting at a very, very basic aspect of a human to human connection that we need to have. I think that's where, if you can do it at that level, I think a lot changes there. But one, let me put it out there about, I don't know whether, Michelle, you went to my website, you had a look at that World Mediation Circle, but this peacemaker thing that you are saying, there are 3 categories of people in that circle. There is the person with the mediator mindset, there's a peacemaker, and then the participant. All 3 are important. The peacemaker, to bring people together, is an art by itself. It's a skill that you need, and actually helping resolve a dispute, that's a skill, separate skill. And of course, a participant who has that mediation mindset. So all 3 are important in that. We're going to get all of them into the circle. So thank you very much. Wonderful talking to both of you. Pleasure. And I think we're going to carry this conversation further. We're going to have more of these, and I'll tell you the schedule of what's happening. Please participate. December 12th, yes, that is immediately coming up. And then the schedule for 2023, all the symposia and all that are planned. Please participate. It's been wonderful. All these thoughts that you brought in, Francis. I think everyone will connect to these. These are things, Michelle is already connected to it. I think everyone will connect to that. I think they're really important. So thank you very much. And let me just